Penn State could be in danger of missing out on some of its top remaining priority prospects.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That could be the case for potentially 3, maybe 4 of Penn State's current priority targets. This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, and thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch. Every single day we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Thanks so much for hanging out with me on a Monday. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We're going to talk about Lex Cyrus, Taz Williams, Andrew Olesh, Randy Adirika, Kobe Howard, a lot of wide receiver, pass-catching targets. We're also going to talk about the commitment of LaVar Arrington II to the class of 2025. And in the final segment, discuss some devastating news as former Penn State defensive back AJ Lytton was killed in a car accident over the weekend. We do begin with the recruiting update as Lex Cyrus, Taz Williams, Andrew Olesh, Randy Adirika, those 4, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be an uphill battle here over the next week or so, give or take, here in the month of July. But what seemed like Lex Cyrus was bound to wind up at Penn State. Penn State's in really good standing with Taz Williams. Well, Andrew Olesh, top in-state tight end in Pennsylvania. His commitment's actually today, depending on when you listen or watch to this episode. And Randy Adirika, it's coming down to Penn State, USC. Miami's not in the fold. Well, now Miami might be back in the fold here. For those 4 in particular, Lex Cyrus's recruitment is pretty simple. It's down to Penn State and South Carolina. All the signs pointed that he was going to Penn State. But in recent episodes, we have talked about how South Carolina just has not given up. They will not give up. They continue to push for Cyrus to see if he will commit. And what was, 70%, 80% confidence that Lex Cyrus will end up at Penn State is slowly turning into, this could be a 50-50 thing, down to the wire. Well, you have 2 wide receiver commits. Lex Cyrus is certainly in need. And after you miss on the likes of Matthew Outten of Virginia Tech, Lex Cyrus becomes even more important, especially, he's from Pennsylvania, but becomes more important when you don't get Matthew Outten. You have 2 wide receivers only in this class of 2025. And you saw the production of what happened in 2023. And 2024's class is good, solid, right? But the more the merrier. The more 4-star prospects that you can collect, the better the outlook is going to be. That's just logical here. Well, the same thing goes for Taz Williams. Okay, Penn State's in really good standing. Taz, out of the state of Texas, had a really good visit, and he wanted to make sure he was thorough with all of his visits. Michigan was originally leading, and then Penn State kind of takes over here in the lead for his recruitment. But now he's posting about Texas A&M. There's rumors that Southern Methodist, SMU, isn't giving up. So again, another recruiting battle here that just don't think that Penn State's got this locked up, that these are guaranteed. Okay, Lex Cyrus can still end up at Penn State. Taz Williams could still end up at Penn State. But there's a very distinct, a realistic possibility that Penn State ends up losing both of them as well. These are 50-50 battles. There is no guarantee that Penn State is going to win either of those. In the case of Andrew Olesh, top in-state Pennsylvania tight end, one of Penn State's priority targets. And Penn State, yes, they're doing well in Pennsylvania, but they're not exactly dominating the state in this cycle. They've seen Matt Zollers commit to Missouri. They've seen Zahir Mathis commit to Ohio State. Even though there's a chance that he could flip, unlikely, but a chance, it's still, you're seeing your top targets overall on your big board for this recruiting cycle go to Big Ten rivals and just leave the part of the region purely, right? Matt Zollers to Missouri. And in this case, once again, now this one isn't, this is 50-50. It's a toss-up. Penn State's in the running. Yeah, Penn State's in the running, but they're distantly 3rd or 4th. Right? Basically, Penn State and Florida, if you think that they're in the race for Andrew Olesh, you are mistaken unfortunately. It's down to Michigan and Alabama. Recruiting experts across 24/7 on three rivals all point to Michigan. Andrew Olesh has said outright in a recent interview that he thinks about Michigan and Alabama the most. Those are essentially his top two schools. So Penn State and Florida, he mentions them, but it's really down to the Wolverines and the Crimson Tide. Again, hopefully he goes to Alabama so that Penn State doesn't lose another recruiting battle to a Big Ten rival. So here, Mathis to Ohio State. I still don't, it doesn't sit right with me that Kanoa Winston ended up choosing Michigan over Penn State, since he is the first cousin of KJ Winston, who's currently on the team. So those, you can try to offset this here if Andrew Olesh just, cut your losses here and just hope that Andrew Olesh ends up committing to Alabama and not the Wolverines in this case. And last but not least, I want to couple him with the offensive targets. We'll get to Randy Adirika in just a moment because Penn State needs a defensive tackle in this class. Who is it going to be? Maybe not Randy Adirika, but there is some good news. Okay, so you have Taz Williams and Lex Cyrus that it's just going to be a tough recruitment here in the next coming weeks. But Kobe Howard had a really good official visit back in June. Ole Miss and Florida are recruiting him, but from what I'm gathering, from what Brian Smith has heard, again, recruiting expert here on the Locked On Podcast Network, that Penn State, okay, if things don't exactly go well with Cyrus, or maybe they get one or the other, they get Cyrus or Williams, you have Kobe Howard, who apparently is in really good standing and could potentially commit to Penn State. So there is some hope here, but if you end up losing all of Olesh, Williams, and Cyrus, yeah, that is a nasty cold streak here for recruiting. After you did so well, Deion Barnes did really well, but overall the team did very well with its recent recruiting. And then you have this happen. Yeah, that's a cold streak if you end up missing out on all three of those players, those offensive targets, and then you don't get Kobe Howard either. That's really bad. So you need to at least get two of these wide receiver targets out of the three, out of those four offensive targets. And then there's Randy Adirika, Florida native. He was down to Miami, USC, Penn State. Then Miami was out of the picture. Well, now they're back in it, apparently. We'll discuss that, plus the impact of LaVar Arrington II's commitment. That was coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. You got to download the Gametime app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. It's summertime, so that means Major League Baseball games. I love going to a good baseball game, and Gametime is my go-to for getting tickets to those games. I've used Gametime to get tickets to Pirate games, to Philly games. I've even used Gametime to get tickets out of the area to go to the College World Series, for example. And Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. So that means you're getting tickets faster and easier when it comes to those games. And get this, prices on the Gametime app actually go down as it gets closer to first pitch. So on top of that, you're getting last minute deals. You can save up to 60% off of buying last minute tickets for not only Major League Baseball games, but sports, concerts, comedy, theater near you. You can get flash deals. You can even save more with in-app exclusive deals ahead of a game or an event. There's all in pricing. You get views of the seats, so you're not second guessing yourself. You know what the point of view is going to be, what it's going to look like ahead of the game. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Let's pick back up with Randy Adirika and then get to a defensive player that's actually committed in the class of 2025, LaVar Arrington II, as a legacy prospect here. Randy Adirika, out of the state of Florida, defensive tackle recruit. It seemed like it was down to Miami, Penn State, USC, and then Miami's out of the picture, and it's really just Penn State and USC. And now Miami is apparently starting to become back into the fold. Brian Smith, Locked On recruiting expert here with the network, likes Randy Adirika a lot as a player. He's interviewed him. He's watched him play on the football field. He's a great prospect, and Penn State should have him highly prioritized and they do. But there's a lot of nuances to recruiting. So if you keep up with the Miami Hurricanes the way that Brian does, Brian follows the Miami Hurricanes closely. He also follows the Auburn Tigers closely, in addition to what he does with the national recruiting perspective. But knowing the ins and outs of those specific programs, right? I'm supposed to know the ins and outs of Penn State. He knows the ins and outs of those specific programs. So there's overlap here. And Miami's interested in Randy Adirika all of a sudden. Why is that? Jarquez Carter is another Penn State defensive line target that's fringe. They've been recruiting him heavily, but they're probably not going to get him. Ohio State becomes it's a domino effect almost in this case. Okay, so why does Jarquez Carter what does his recruitment have to do with Randy Adirika? These are two different prospects. Well, Ohio State and Miami are the finalist for Carter. It sounds like Ohio State is making a strong push to land Carter. Okay, so now what does that mean for Miami? So since Miami isn't going to land its top target when it comes to defensive line recruiting, that means they got to turn, they got to pivot and get the player that they think is next on that list, is the next best thing. In that case, that would be Randy Adirika. Penn State did everything right in this case. It was a really good official visit. All they had to do was fend off that school from California, USC. But now if Miami gets back involved, this becomes even more of a toss-up than it was. It was simpler. You just had to keep the Trojans away. But now you got the Hurricanes back involved. And something that was important to Adirika, some of these other prospects as well, is that staying close to home is important to them. So if Miami is going to be a little more involved in his recruitment here over the later part of the summer, yeah, it gets interesting. Penn State needs defensive tackles, though. They do not have a defensive tackle committed in this class. They got plenty of pass rushers. They got plenty of edge defenders, but nobody in the interior. And that has to be a really good selling point here down the stretch if you intend to get Adirika. I believe Brian when he sings his praises. He's really good. He's an ideal prospect that you want to commit to your program, just the kind of person that he is, how he's going to hustle, how he's going to be involved in the program. He's not just a good football player, he's a good person. So I believe I will take Brian's word for it that Adirika is an ideal defensive target for Penn State. This is literally and figuratively a big miss for Penn State if they do not get him in the defensive line room for this class of 2025. Now let's talk about a defender that is actually committed in the class of 2025. That is LaVar Arrington II, the son of arguably the greatest linebacker in Penn State history. And he set off some fireworks himself on the 4th of July with his commitment. I hope everybody had a great 4th, by the way. But yes, he announced his commitment on the 4th of July and becomes that other linebacker recruit commitment next to Alex Tatch after DJ McClary had flipped to Rutgers. And then you still have Deshaun Burnett, but he could eventually project as a defensive end. So you have another really good high-quality defender that just disrupts offensive game plans. That at the end of the day, and even LaVar Arrington II himself could actually move down to the line of scrimmage. Penn State is almost recruiting a bunch of positionless defenders when it comes to the front seven. Guys that can be that off-ball linebacker, be that future number 11. All these guys are in contention to wear that number. Cortez Harris, Max Granville, LaVar Arrington II, right? Any of these players, they are being recruited just because of how disruptive they are on defense. They can be at defensive end if they need them. They can be at that off-ball linebacker spot. They're versatile. And if you watch the tape, you look at LaVar Arrington II's film, you can see that he is related. LaVar Arrington is his father. Now, I'm not going to go out here and say confidently because the jury's still out. How good can he be? He's a developmental prospect. That's just the honest part of it, that there's still a long way to go. I don't know that he makes an instant impact in year 1 or year 2. I think a red shirt would be beneficial. That's just my opinion. And from talking to other people, that's just the case. But prove all of us wrong. Prove the doubters wrong. So, but don't think because I don't want to mislead anybody. I don't want to mislead you as an audience and say that, oh, LaVar Arrington II is exactly like his father and that he is going to be the second best linebacker in Penn State history. That's a long way to go to live up to what his dad was when he wore that number 11 back in the 90s. But in the case of LaVar Arrington II, let's actually talk about him as a player. What does he do well? Flies to the football, just like his dad, but in his own way, right? He is just speedy. He does not give up a million miles an hour. I'll notice this with other football players, especially at the high school level. They obviously clean this up when they get into the college, and you can't do this in the pros. But there are prospects that as they get closer to the football, they hit the brakes. LaVar Arrington II, the first plays that you see on his highlight tape is him just running through the play. It's almost like he's running through a brick wall when he is making a tackle. He's tackling through the offensive player. That's just the physicality. Yeah, right. Just going 100 miles an hour and not recklessly, right? It's a coordinated speed. He's very good at turning on the jet. So he can go from 0 to 100 very well. Does not give up on plays, right? If he's away from the football, he's going to chase down that player. Doesn't matter how far away he is. Arrington II does not give up. And like I said, as I mentioned, he tackles through the player. He lays the hit stick. Okay. He's a very powerful player. He plays with authority, plays with confidence. Yes, it makes sense that he is the son of LaVar Arrington. The traits are there, but I don't want to mislead anybody. I don't want to sit here and say, yeah, oh yeah, he is absolutely going to wear that number 11 one day and be just like his father. No, he's got some competition. Max Granville is very good. Cortez Harris is very good. Tony Rojas wants that number 11 as well. So right there's all these contenders here. Who is going to be the next one to wear that number 11 jersey after Abdul Carter? There's going to be a lot of players at Penn State that are going to battle for that prestigious honor. But it helps Penn State because, hey, linebacker was concerning. Deshaun Burnett could move to defensive end. You just lost DJ McClary. You lost out on some other key linebacker targets in this class of 2025. And now you bolster it once again with Arrington II. And this is obviously a very difficult subject to talk about, but it's important to finish up the show this way as AJ Lytton, former Penn State defensive back, died in a car accident over the weekend. Just going to talk about the news, share it with you so that everybody stays informed with information that's relevant to Penn State football. That's coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. This kind of news is very difficult to read about. It's obviously very difficult to talk about. And before discussing it, I just want to say to all of you listening and watching this segment, friends and family that you have, tell them you love them a little more, hug them a little tighter. You just never know when things could change radically in the blink of an eye. At the age of 24, that was the case for former Penn State cornerback, defensive back AJ Lytton, along with two other high school teammates, Isaiah Hazel and Kyrie Jackson. That's very devastating news over the 4th of July weekend as they were killed in a car accident. Jackson and Hazel pronounced dead at the scene, and Linton was taken to the hospital but could not be saved. Penn State put out a statement immediately saying the Penn State football family mourns the loss of former Nittany Lion AJ Lytton. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family, friends, high school, and all involved in the tragedy. And of course, I know that myself and every one of you that are Penn State fans would echo this same sentiment here. They went to Dr. Henry Wise High School in Upper Marlboro. They were teammates back at 4 or 5 years ago, and they had very good high school careers, very talented football players. They all played Division I. This one really hits close to the Penn State family because, I mean, obviously Lytton played football at Penn State, but Penn State knows all of the coaches, all of the friends, all of the family that are connected to these three players. Marcus Allen, for example, went to Dr. Henry Wise High School in Maryland. So Penn State has very strong relationships. I've seen players like Curtis Jacobs share his thoughts on the matter as well. This is just very, very tragic. And I don't think people sometimes don't realize how deep this truly runs in terms of just how close these players are to one another. So yeah, they went to different high schools, but they grew up in the same area. They had all the same connections because they were being recruited by Penn State once upon a time. They were attending the same football camps. They were playing against each other. They were on the same football team, right? These three individuals were on the same talented Wise high school football teams. In the case of Jackson, was just drafted by the Minnesota Vikings, played at Oregon, was a very talented football player, and seemed to have a promising career ahead of him in the NFL. And that's why I started off the segment the way I did. I don't have an opinion to give on the story and the situation again, other than just hug your friends and family a little tighter this time around. Tell them you love them as much as you can, because you just never know when things could change. As far as the initial reports about this, the police are continuing to investigate. But there was an accident involving three vehicles, one of them with the three former football players. But there was a vehicle that was trying to change lanes, was going very fast, and struck the vehicle that had Lytton, Hazel, and Jackson in the car. Apparently, this is, again, according to the reports, that they presume that alcohol was involved as well. This happened early Saturday morning, a little bit after 3 a.m., officially reported at 3:14, and none of the three survived. The drivers, the passengers of all the other cars that were involved did survive. They remained unharmed. But for anybody that might not remember AJ Lytton during his time at Penn State, began his career at Florida State and was recruited by Penn State. I mean, he was the former Maryland Gatorade Player of the Year, was very talented coming out of high school, one of the top cornerbacks in the nation, ended up choosing Florida State, and then wound up in the transfer portal and played with the Nittany Lions for a season. So obviously, again, their words can only express how devastated Penn State community is, the Maryland community, local Maryland community, and just college football in general. That football in general, you don't like to see news like this anywhere involved in any sector of life. And here it really hits close to home in this case. Like I said, there were a lot of people that were connected to AJ Lytton, even though he was at Penn State for just 1 year. But all those players, all those people crossed paths once upon a time. Like I said, just tell your friends and family how important they are to you. And that is where we will end this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. It is on a somber note. We will have more news and analysis around Penn State football, Penn State wrestling throughout the week. I want to thank each and every one of you for checking out this episode, staying tuned through all of it. If you're not already, become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations about all things Penn State Nittany Lions athletics. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section down about recruiting, the football team, anything that you would like to share that is on your mind. And for more conversations about those Penn State Nittany Lions, keep it right here on Locked On Nittany Lions.